Hello folks, it's me, DeMontropolis, and I'm going to be taking a look at Vampire Killer. Now you might be asking, what is Vampire Killer, and why does it have the same box art as Castlevania? Well, Vampire Killer is like a long-lost sister to Castlevania, and parallels its NES counterpart in many ways, from having the same premise, soundtrack, characters, locations, and development team. However, this game has a completely different gameplay loop. If you've never heard of this game, it's because Vampire Killer was released in 1986 on the MSX2, an 8-bit computer that never made it to the US. But we do owe it to Vampire Killer for laying the foundation for the more open-ended Metroidvania titles in the franchise, arguably leaving a bigger legacy than its counterpart. So with that said, let's jump into the shoes of Simon Belmont once again, and become a Vampire Killer. As mentioned before, Vampire Killer shifts its gameplay loop from linear action to labyrinth stages with a heavier emphasis on exploration. The game does not have any scrolling due to the MSX2's limitations, so every level is screen by screen. This slows down the pace of the game just enough to lean more into that focus on exploration. The game uses this limitation to its advantage. Some examples are that certain stages have wraparounds and will loop forever if you run in one direction, and falling down a pit from above is not a guaranteed kill if there is a room underneath you, meaning you'll simply transition to the screen below. There are more specific case-by-case situations about how this benefits the gameplay loop, but I'll get to them later. There is a downside to falling down the screen, in that there is no distinction from vertically wrapping screens to bottomless pits. The only way to figure it out is to jump there yourself, and sometimes the game design forces you to do this if you want to progress, while other times a screen wrap may seem like the only way out, only for it to be a death pit. Given the game's non-linear structure, the higher focus on exploration lets you explore the contents of each stage and carve your own path to success. I'm sure that the paths I've chosen to get through the game are very different for the next person, and while some paths are more efficient than others, everyone goes through a video game differently and can come out of it with different strategies. What does suck about the game's structure is that there is no way to gain extra lives or 1-ups. You start with 2 extra lives and can only die 3 times before you game over. This unfortunately has the side effect of making a score completely useless, as you can no longer get 1-ups through the score. If that wasn't bad enough, there are no continues. You have to make it through the entire game with just 3 lives, as getting a game over will take you back to the title screen. Granted, I'd say Vampire Killer is easier in comparison to Castlevania for a variety of reasons, but this fact alone can be very intimidating to newcomers who do not have the patience to start all the way back at the beginning. You can play Vampire Killer with basically just the arrow keys and the spacebar. As the spacebar is mapped to attacking, this means that jumping has been moved to the up arrow. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's a bit floppy and awkward in tight situations, especially when near staircases. Just like before, you can only climb staircases at the bottom using the up arrow, so it's impossible to jump because of the context sensitivity. While you still use the eponymous Vampire Killer whip to attack, it behaves differently in that there is almost no startup before you actually throw out your attack. While this does make it quicker in attacking, you are going to be spending most of your time with the Leather Whip instead of the Morning Star due to how your primary weapon gets wiped at the start of every block. This has the side effect of making enemies stronger than they actually are, and the whip isn't too responsive with multi-hitting. It's not like I can get into a clean rhythm like in Castlevania, it just feels like I'm mashing in hopes that every button press will send out my attack. The whip's hit detection is also a little shoddy, and if playing the game without sound, I can't actually tell if I hit something. Missing my target completely can make the difference between getting hit or not, but it can also backfire with learning if a wall is actually breakable, because there is otherwise no indication. And as most of the game's silver keys are hidden inside these walls, leaving them behind because you thought it wasn't breakable will only waste time without you even realizing it. Thankfully, you are not restricted to your whip, as Vampire Killer allows you to have different primary weapons. These include a throwing axe and a blue cross. They function similarly to the cross boomerang from Castlevania, but you can only throw one at a time and they do not cost hearts, giving you a solid ranged option. The main difference between them is the axe is twice as strong, while the cross travels much farther, though I typically prefer the axe. The main catch is you have to catch it on the rebound, otherwise you lose the weapon and go back to your leather whip. It's a pretty interesting concept, and it definitely changes how you fight enemies, with the axe being a much easier way to defeat the game's axe knights. You can also have the dagger as a primary weapon. Whereas it was by far the worst sub-weapon in Castlevania, the throwing daggers here are OP! This is because you can have two of them on screen. One dagger does the same damage as one leather whip strike, and they function as primary weapons. The infinite range has no downside to it, unlike the axe and cross, and given they are quite spammable, they are by far the best primary weapon in the game. They are only in 3 of the game's 6 blocks, but are invaluable compared to anything else you may find. Vampire Killer has an all-new inventory system that allows you to hold multiple sub-weapons and passive items. The 2 sub-weapons, Holy Water and Hourglass, which serves the same function as the stopwatch, can be held at the same time. There are maps to collect, which can help make navigation easier. The passive items are where things get more interesting and help diversify how you build your inventories across the game. There's a red shield that doubles your defense, and a yellow shield that nullifies projectiles. There's a candle that outlines any breakable blocks in a stage, movement upgrades like speed boots and jumping wings, rings and orbs that make you invincible, and even Bibles that affect shop prices. That's right, this game has a shop system. Across the game, you will find these white merchants, either out in the open or hidden in breakable walls. Smack them enough times and they'll offer the item they are assigned to sell, along with the amount of hearts it costs. Merchants are great for a variety of reasons, the biggest one being that they expand on how you use your hearts, making a double as currency in addition to ammo. There are also several items exclusive to them, such as a blue potion that fully recovers your health. Speaking of health, the most common way to heal is not actually from wall chicken. In fact, there's no wall chicken at all in this game. Certain candles hold red orbs that can heal roughly a quarter of your health, and since these are found in candles, they are much easier to locate and remember. The merchant selling full health potions also serves as a second option for healing in stages. While wall chicken is still good and all, these options in Vampire Killer are more newcomer friendly. The only way to actually progress across each stage is to collect a silver key, used to unlock the door leading to the next stage. If they are not hanging out in the open, silver keys will always be hidden inside breakable walls, which are always made up by 2x2 tiles. The early game stages are shorter and don't have many breakable walls, but the silver keys are hidden pretty well and require some thinking. Stage 2's key is hidden in a wall that seems impossible to hit, but taking a leap of faith into that tight corridor means breaking the wall is your only way out. If that seems daunting, you can instead throw an axe forward to break the wall and get the key from above. Stage 8's key is the first key where you have to use the game's screen wrapping to land on that platform, and it's pretty clever to figure out. Later stages start to play with your mind by having multiple silver keys available, usually to confuse you on how to get it, or lure you to your doom. Besides the mandatory silver keys to collect, you can also find gold keys, which are common enough that you'll likely just stumble upon them by accident. They unlock blue item chests that are also spread across each stage in great quantities, enough to overpower the amount of gold keys you can find. As you play the game, you'll start carving a path in terms of what chests are worth going after to best help you out, tying back to the game's non-linear structure. The reason why you can hold and use Holy Water and Hourglass simultaneously is because of how they are activated. You have to press left or right while airborne to throw Holy Water in said direction, and you have to press down while airborne to activate the Hourglass. On paper, this doesn't sound too bad, but this does create some frustrating limitations. Because you have to be airborne, you cannot use these sub-weapons when climbing stairs. The Holy Water being mapped to left and right also means you can very easily use it by accident when trying to press these buttons ahead of time and end up wasting hearts, made worse by the Holy Water now using 5 hearts, just like the Hourglass. In Castlevania, one of the coolest uses of the stopwatch was to freeze the presses in Stage 6 and walk under them safely. That is not the case in Vampire Killer. I expected them to get frozen only to be squashed like an idiot. I will say the presses at least have smoother hitboxes than in the NES game, and they deal half your max health and damage instead of instantly killing you. As Vampire Killer parallels Castlevania, it has the same group of enemies. However, the existing enemies have gotten touched up just enough to rebalance their threat levels. There are actually two types of fishmen, the blue ones that are weaker and the red ones that are tougher and spit out fireballs. Certain rooms also have fishmen waiting to ambush you as soon as you finish climbing the stairs. Spear Knights and Blood Skeletons are much faster and more erratic in their movement, while enemies like Hunchbacks and Bone Dragons are slower in attacking. It also helps that Vampire Killer no longer has damage inflation. Everything does a set amount of damage across the whole game. Black Panthers are now more dangerous because of this, as they deal the same amount of damage as boss contact usually does. However, the lack of damage inflation is a double-edged sword. It's great that the enemies that appear across multiple blocks do not artificially scale, but at the same time, the late-stage enemies also don't get stronger by comparison. Every projectile does the smallest amount of damage possible, nullified even more by having either of the shields. Axe Knights, one of the last enemies introduced in the game, are hardly a threat because of this. Even if they manage to hit you with their axe, its damage is very negligible. And Hunchbacks, the most recurring enemy in the game, are only made harder by the increasing amount of cheap rooms where they can get a cheap shot on you. Overall, the only reason you'll be dying to damage in this game is if you either don't know how to fight the enemies properly, you don't know where the health is if you need it, or a mix of both. There is one enemy unique to this game, the Slimes. They only appear hidden inside candles and breakable walls, popping out shortly afterwards to surprise players. They don't do a lot of damage, but they help reinforce the game's trial and error memorization of which candles you should avoid and which breakable blocks could cause trouble for you if you get too hasty. Even though Vampire Killer parallels many aspects of Castlevania, it is not without its own creative liberties. Stage 12 in Castlevania was just a straight line through the sewers, but here, the tunnels in the background are actually portals leading you to different parts of the stage, achieved by holding down and pressing up. Stage 18 is the final level of the game, but compared to what was basically just climbing stairs to the final boss, Vampire Killer has an actual full-length stage and is given an opportunity to bring back the song Walking Along the Edge, which fits well. On the graphical side, Vampire Killer is very similar to its counterpart, but has smoother textures and easier to look at backgrounds. Like, look at how good these trees look. Granted, this is coming from the MSX2, a computer system that is naturally better at handling memory and a larger palette, being able to get away with highly detailed portraits in the background of Stage 15 and Dracula's own portrait. Overall, while they share the same tones, the presentation of Vampire Killer is more spooky and haunted, working better to define a sense of claustrophobia and dread. The songs are also reused from Castlevania, though the compositions are slightly different, being more digital and a bit higher toned, but I still enjoy the more mellow tweaks, such as bringing down the percussion to make a song more ambient and eerie, fitting for the game's slower pace. To critique some areas of the level design, the screen-by-screen nature may lend itself to you getting jumped by enemies just on the other side. It can get annoying with Black Panthers early on, but they are avoidable. The biggest offender is with some hunchback placements, especially in later stages where you'll be climbing up a staircase only to have 2 or 3 hunchbacks hounding the top of the staircase, and damage is inevitable as you can't use sub-weapons on ladders. It's not the worst thing in the world, as the hunchbacks don't do a lot of damage, and it can be neutered if you're holding a red shield. A much bigger problem is there are quite a lot of softlocks. I've only found 3, but that's 3 too many. In Stage 11, if you make it to the end door without the silver key, you cannot go back because you can't jump over the left wall. In Stage 17, if you drop down to where the silver key is without breaking a wall from the other side before dropping down to get the silver key, you have no other option but to die. Stage 12 probably has the most obnoxious softlock though. The silver key is right in front of the boss gate, hidden in an upper wall and is guarded by a bone dragon. However, there is a lower block that can also be broken, but that same block is the only way to actually get the key, as your jump is too short to grab it from the ground. You're likely going to break that block so you can get behind the bone dragon, which is naturally the safest place to fight them. But it turns out that breakable blocks do not return, so the game's design is deliberately setting you up for a reset. Due to how Vampire Killer's engine is designed, all the game's bosses are nerfed in one way or another. Even Death, who remains the most difficult boss out of everyone, is still pretty easy. The biggest reason is due to all bosses being vulnerable to Hourglass, not just the first two. Holy Water does not freeze bosses anymore, but instead does damage on every frame that it touches a boss. Pair that with Hourglass, and it's a deadly combo. Queen Medusa has one of the easiest one-shot tricks I've ever seen in a game like this. Another reason is due to damage inflation not existing anymore, boss projectiles do very little damage. What would kill you in 4 hits in Castlevania now kills you in 32. I can basically stand on the left platform in the creature in Igor's room and just throw holy water without fear of dying. The mummy men have a laughably brain-dead arena, as you actually enter from the right and are positioned on a higher up platform that keeps you safe from their contact damage. Just stay there and you'll eventually win. Dracula is slightly more interesting than the others, not his first phase though, as his 3-way spread is much slower and does not get aimed at you. When he's defeated though, his giant portrait comes to life, a boss fight unique to Vampire Killer. All he does is spit out bats, which cover up the platforms that you need to traverse. It's not hard, as you just need the throwing dagger so you can keep striking his forehead gem from a safe spot, and you've basically won at that point. While rough in design, it's definitely the most memorable part of Vampire Killer. Unlike Castlevania, there is no cutscene that shows you the map in between levels or an ending cinematic. You cut right to the next block and your ending is a wall of text. But there's at least a new song to go with it, I guess. It sucks because by comparison, Vampire Killer seems like it did not get as much attention put into its development as Castlevania did. In the end, I've come up with 14 pros and 14 cons, split right down the middle. Like I said before, we do owe it to Vampire Killer for its legacy that has inspired future titles, and you can see the seeds being sown right away in Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. At the same time, it hasn't aged as well as its counterpart, and the biggest reason comes to the bottleneck difficulty. Either you're never going to learn the game because of the lack of continues, or the game will become really easy thanks to universally low damage. And with that, I'm going to give Vampire Killer a rating of 5 out of 10. Okay. And that's the end of this review. If you like what you saw, consider giving a like and subscribe to my channel. As per usual, I have the Castlevania review and my Discord server in the description, so consider joining if you like my content. I also recently surpassed 200 subscribers and have opened a new poll for which franchise I should look into next. I won't be able to get at it right away because I have some other videos pending on my to-do list. And with that said, I'll be signing off. Take care, folks.